Although Vincente Minnelli is known for his musicals and Kirk Douglas for his roles in action films, their collaboration dramatically describes the relationship between the art and the industry of cinema. In fact, they speak of only one thing: the greatest image-making machine of all time, Hollywood and its studios.
What goes on in the private lives of the famous, the notorious? You will share the laughter and the tears of talented people who stop at nothing to attain success until success stops them. Of romantic people who fight for love until love whips them.
My first experience of Hollywood was short. From 1931 to 1936, I earned a good reputation in theater circles on Broadway with a few big hits like Ziegfeld Follies in 1935 with Duke Ellington's company and George Gershwin. At that time, New York intellectuals looked down on Hollywood, but I gave in to the temptation, and in 1936 I left for the City of Angels with a Paramount contract in my pocket. Paramount is one of the 5 majors. That's what the big cinema companies are called. It's also the oldest. It had been founded in 1914 by 2 visionaries, Jesse Lasky and Adolf Zukor. In the 20s, these 2 producers, admirers of films with big, epic entertainment, launched stars such as Rudolph Valentino and Gloria Swanson. Throughout the 30s, Paramount had a string of big hits thanks to Joseph von Sternberg, Leo McCarey and Ernst Lubitsch. There is a Paramount style, an aesthetic of fake luxury. I soon began to feel like a useless cog in the midst of this massive machine. In fact, I was hired so that I wouldn't be taken under contract with a competitor, a system that was frequently used by the studios. It was in 1940 that I met the man who was going to change everything in my life, Arthur Freed. This composer of songs as famous as Singin' in the Rain had been an autonomous producer for 1 year at MGM. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was the most powerful of the majors. It was founded in the 20s through the association of Samuel Goldwyn and Louis B. Mayer, assisted by Irving Thalberg.
To have sent the beauty that he sees before him, these lovely girls, and you had the finest of them, greet you, and that's to show you how we feel about you and the kind of a good
Its policy, deliberately oriented towards the star system, paid off for a long time. Everything was done with the maximum of means. MGM had the most beautiful actresses and the most prestigious actors working for it. In the 40s, MGM was specialized in musicals. For 2 years, I got familiar with this genre that I'd worked on before on stage. I filmed a few musical numbers with Judy Garland, who became my wife in 1945.
At the fair, don't tell me the lights are shining any place.
With Arthur Freed, we revolutionized the post-war musical. To make a film work, you have to bring a lot of different talents together. The writer, the set designer, and the actors all have a contribution to make to the final piece of work. That's where I discovered the importance of the producer and the complicated relationship that the creators have with the people in charge of the studios. This is the relationship that I focus on in 2 of my films. We'll talk about it again later on. For the moment, it was the time of general acclaim. An American in Paris had won 8 Oscars, as well as the Irving Thalberg Prize awarded to the most creative talents. After this success, I started on the first of my 3 collaborations with Kirk Douglas in The Bad and the Beautiful, a film about the strange, cruel, and fascinating world of Hollywood.
Hollywood. When I left my prints on the Boulevard of Stars, I realized the importance of having dreams and fighting for them. As a child, I already dreamed of living and being an actor in this mythical city. I'd always wanted to be an actor. I was born Isser Danielovich on December 9, 1916 in Amsterdam, state of New York, in the United States. My parents were illiterate peasants who emigrated from Russia in 1910. They had escaped from the pogroms. My mother wanted her children to grow up in this marvelous country where the streets were paved with gold. I studied at the University of St. Laurent at the National School of Dramatic Art. That's where the amateur theater troupe found me a name. Isser Danielovich became Kirk Douglas. After a spell in the U.S. Navy, I landed in Los Angeles in 1945, where, on the advice of Lauren Bacall, the producer Hal Wallace gave me an audition at Paramount for The Strange Love of Martha Ivers with Barbara Stanwyck. That's how I ended up working at Paramount for 5 years. I didn't like the roles they were giving me, and I didn't renew my contract.
I want your charity. If I'm through as an actor, I'm through. And to hell with you and the whole murderous business.
It was thanks to a small film, The Champion, directed by Mark Robson at United Artists, that I became a star. United Artists had a funny history. The studio was founded in 1919 by the greatest stars of the early age of cinema: Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, David Ward Griffith, and Charles Chaplin, in order to balance power relations between producers and artists. United made the first film noir movies, and it was where Hitchcock, Sternberg, Lubitsch, and Chaplin had their greatest successes. But the realities of the system took over very quickly, and United was torn to pieces by unscrupulous producers. Excuse me for stating the obvious. My success as an actor allowed me to work with the greatest directors in Hollywood. In 1955, I founded my own production company. I named it after my mother, Brina. I produced The Vikings, directed by Richard Fleischer, where I acted alongside Tony Curtis. But it was in 1951 that my collaboration with Vincent Minnelli began. Clark Gable having turned down the part of Jonathan Shields in The Bad and the Beautiful. The film took place against the background of Hollywood. I played the role of the mean cinema producer. My character was a mixture of David O. Selznick and Val Lewton. These 2 producers came from 2 different schools. One was a tyrant and a despot, the other creative and practical-minded. But they in fact both did the same job, and it was the difference in their approaches that the film shows. When it was announced that Lana Turner was the beautiful heroine and me the bad guy, there was uproar in the papers. But I didn't see things the same way. After The Postman Always Rings Twice, I think that it was one of her best roles.
I agree with Kirk. Lana found exactly the right tone. She drew on her personal memories, and Georgia, her character, is reminiscent of both Diana Barrymore, the daughter of a great actor, and Ava Gardner. They were like splendid animals in love with freedom who find themselves locked up in a zoo cage.
There are no great men, Buster. There's only men.
Kirt, look off your face! Who gave you the right to dig into me and turn me inside out and decide what I'm like? How do you know how I feel about you, how deep it goes? Maybe it's deeper than I want it to be.
Romantic people who fight for
This
love.
rather cruel and cynical story captures the love and the hate of people who work in the cinema towards Hollywood. The ambition, the opportunism, the sense of power.
Back upstairs. Wherever and whenever you discuss great motion picture drama, the picture that will be talked about first will be the bad and the beautiful.
It was 1951. Hollywood was once again an economic and ideological power. American cinema had just started exporting again. The myths came back to the fore. Billy Wilder rode on the crest of this wave and made Sunset Boulevard, another film on this milieu which fascinates the world. In this movie, Gloria Swanson plays alongside Willem Holden and Erich von Stroheim. Her character, Norma Desmond, puts the City of Angels face to face with its own demons. Ten years later exactly, at a moment when the Mecca of cinema was no more than the shadow of its former self, Vincente Minnelli made 2 Weeks in Another Town, another film about cinema which tells the story of the misadventures of a movie shoot in Rome.
Now, producer John Houseman and director Vincent Minnelli reveal the fascinating story of Rome's international film set.
We were a long way from legend and the little path paved with gold. Hollywood continued its process of self-criticism.
And to hell with you and the whole murderous business. And then what? You stupid, stubborn, washed-up ham!
As the temperamental foreign star who got her first lesson in American movie techniques.
I pulled all your idiot tricks and plenty more. Only you still have a chance.
Whereas the bad and the beautiful symbolized myth, 2 Weeks in Another Town gave the sordid reflection of productions in the 60s. It was a time when many directors left Hollywood and went to shoot in Europe in deplorable artistic conditions. Kirk and I had been disgusted by the attitudes of producers. Edward G. Robinson played the role of the director. At 60, he still had scars from the time of McCarthyism at the beginning of the 50s, when Hollywood was a machine that chopped up the lives of men who'd been put on a blacklist.
At the same time, and just under a mile from our camp, Joseph Mankiewicz was directing his super production with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor.
Siren of the Nile. Her stunning beauty and notoriety turned the tide of civilization. Richard Burton as Mark Antony, rash, impetuous leader of once invincible legions, dreaded adversary on the field of battle. But a pawn in the arms of this woman.
I decided to throw a small party in order to celebrate the first anniversary of the release of Spartacus, which I'd produced for Stanley Kubrick. Our first collaboration had been on Paths of Glory, a film about a true story that was a tribute to the soldiers of the First World War. It was banned in France for many years. But like the cinema, which is only a mirror of reality, I then thought to myself that man controlled the world and that ideas and symbols could at times help him to do so. Art and industry don't always get on so well together in the studios. We didn't have this problem with lust for life.
That's what I mean.
Kirk Douglas was playing the role of the doomed artist. His resemblance to the painter was extraordinary. I finished Kismet, an uninteresting picture I did under contract, and as the wheat in France had to be harvested, they kept wheat fields for me artificially in the south of France. I wanted people to look at this film in the same way they looked at a painting. When you do a film on the life of a painter, you have to show his work. I did a lot of research before starting to shoot. I had to fight with the studios to use a type of film that was no longer in use in order to obtain colors that more accurately represented those of the canvases. We dealt with the problem of artistic creation in its full dimension. It was important that I didn't fall into the conventional trap of MGM. In this role, Kirk was the ideal tool to bring to life the complexity of a man engaged with creating.
What's the matter? Have you seen him? See who? Who? Gauguin.
People have stopped coming to the house. They avoid us. It isn't very comfortable.
Is your young man one of those who stopped coming?
Yes, he is, but that doesn't matter so much.
Yes, it does.
It's the rest of the family. Mother pretends she doesn't notice, but I know it's upset, and she'll never tell you, so I felt I must.
I'll get out. Take a few days to finish this, and then I'll leave.
No, Vincent, I didn't mean that.
Of course you did, Wilhelmine. It's all right. I've accomplished what I stayed here to do, and maybe it is time to move on.
This role completely changed all my theories on acting and made me aware of the difference there was between an artist and a true creator. The artist is inspired by what he sees around him. He absorbs matter which is filtered through his identity. He transforms and restores it, and the result depends on his talent. Orson Welles illustrates this process. In Citizen Kane, he used different techniques that already existed.
Thank you. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles.
Low-angle shots, alternating shots, depth of field. But the way in which he set them up gave the film a unique dimension. The filter transformed matter. On the other hand, the creator feels an uncontrollable force welling up in him that pushes him to create and to express emotions which are at times impossible for him to define. Erich von Stroheim is the perfect example. His way of depicting life and showing his humanity through a savage and uninhibited realism is of the same nature as the passion which devoured Van Gogh. One does not choose to be a creator. As for me, I came close to doing myself damage in Vincent's character. During the shoot, I wore heavy shoes like his. I always left one with the lace untied so that I would feel off balance.
Oh, come along. You wouldn't want to dump like that.
This untied lace gave him, and gave me, a shuffling walk, making me always doubt myself.
That's what you're looking for, a house?
On the other hand, I never doubted the way in which art can touch people. During the shoot in Provence, an old woman came to me to tell me that she had rented a room to the real Vincent.
Moi, je l'ai connu, Monsieur Rondeau.
Oh,
listen to the song. This is very interesting. This charming lady here says she knew Van Gogh. Quel âge avez-vous?
75 ans et demi.
Est-ce que j'ai l'air comme Van Gogh? Oui.
À part que vous êtes plus drôle de figure que nous.
Oui.
Mais enfin, vous m'avez fait un effet quand je vous ai vu rentrer.
C'est vrai.
What deeply touched me was that 60 years later, this old woman had held on to the memory of those moments shared with the great painter, and she wanted to bring that moment of emotion back to life with me.
Van Gogh was a little thinner than I. Mais vous avez vu les tableaux qu'il a fait?
Le Chambly.
Oh.
Il a fait en haut là.
Kirk Douglas was once again nominated for an Oscar. He didn't receive the award, but the critics were unanimous in their praise. The film was considered as a masterpiece. A few years later, he acted for Elia Kazan in The Arrangement. This portrait of a broken man who is trying to put his life back together again was a golden role for him. Kazan was to say that this work was the most faithful mirror of his own existence, and that only Kirk Douglas could have played this role, blending his European roots in the great melting pot of the American identity. Vincente Minnelli died on July 25, 1986 in Los Angeles. He managed to maintain his integrity without ever falling into the trap of the Hollywood system. He had the good fortune to experience the last years of the studio's splendor. Jean Cocteau said that mirrors ought to think before reflecting an image. Vincente Minnelli and Kirk Douglas chose to show Hollywood behind the scenes, but without trying to destroy the myth. The work they did together on Lust for Life can be summarized as follows. Van Gogh painted the sublime in order to forget the sordid. Minnelli showed the sordid in order to find the sublime.